Hello everyone, welcome back to GraveTales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. I want you to leave a comment on where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, be sure to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get into tonight's stories. I didn't know what to expect when I walked into my brother's hospital room that night. Honestly, I wasn't even sure why I came. We hadn't spoken in 3 years. Not since the fight. Not since the night he showed up at my apartment drunk. Said some things he couldn't take back, and left me with more resentment than grief when I heard the cancer had spread. But when the nurse called to tell me Landon probably wouldn't make it through the night, something in my chest twisted. Not guilt. Not exactly. More like unfinished business. And I didn't want his last words to be to a stranger. I arrived just after 9 p.m. The halls were quiet. Most of the staff gone for the evening shift change. Landon's room was dimly lit, the only sound coming from the slow, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor beside his bed. He looked smaller than I remembered, sunken, pale, his dark hair matted with sweat, tubes in his arms, oxygen up his nose. And yet, when I stepped closer, his eyes opened, and he smiled. "Hey," he rasped. "Took you long enough." I didn't know what to say. I stood at the foot of the bed, hands in my jacket pockets, like a coward. The last time I saw him, he had a black eye and a busted lip. This time, he just looked hollow. Eventually, I muttered, "Figured you might want to see someone familiar." He nodded. "I do." There was a long pause, one of those thick silences that swallows time whole. Then he motioned for me to come closer. "I need to tell you something," he whispered. I leaned in. The smell of antiseptic and sweat was overpowering. He grabbed my wrist with a surprising strength and pulled me close until his lips were almost touching my ear. "I killed someone," he said. I blinked. "What?" He nodded, eyes watery but steady. "I killed someone, a long time ago. Thought I could outrun it. Thought maybe it'd go away, but it didn't." My mouth went dry. I thought maybe it was the morphine talking. A fever dream. But the way he looked at me, he meant it. I buried him. Landon continued, out by the tree line in Belwick, just beyond that old rail path where we used to ride bikes. I took a step back. "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his face I didn't recognize. Fear. His name was Simon Creel. Silence. "Do you remember him?" he asked. I did. Barely. Simon was a year older than us. Quiet. Loner. Went missing sometime around the summer of 2010. We were teenagers then, partying in the woods, skipping school, doing dumb things with dumber people. I hadn't thought about him in over a decade. "You killed Simon." Landon nodded. "It was an accident at first, but we made sure he didn't get up again." I felt the room spin. He coughed then, a ragged, wet sound, and his grip on my wrist loosened. The machine started beeping faster, and I instinctively reached for the nurse call button. Before I could press it, he said one more thing, but I don't think he stayed dead. I stared at him. "What?" Landon's eyes were wide now, unblinking. "He's been following me for years. He doesn't age, doesn't speak, just stands there, watching. He's been outside my apartment, at the grocery store. I've seen him in mirrors that aren't facing anything." Then he whispered, "He knows I told you." The monitors spiked and nurses rushed in. I was pushed aside. Someone yelled for a crash cart. I backed into the hallway, my hands shaking. 10 minutes later, they pronounced him dead. Landon Mercer, 29 years old, gone from this world. His final words, He knows I told you. I left the hospital in a haze, my ears ringing. I didn't cry, I didn't feel anything, really, until I got home around 11 that night and decided to look up Simon Creel. I didn't expect to find anything. After all, Simon had disappeared over 14 years ago. There was barely a news blurb about him when it happened. Just another teenager who went missing and was never found. But when I typed his name into a search engine, something strange happened. A result popped up immediately. Simon Creel, local author, book signing this Friday, froze. It had to be someone else. Had to be someone else. Had to. I clicked the link. There was a photo. It was him. Same face. Same dull eyes. Same mop of dirty blonde hair. A little older, sure. A little sharper around the jaw. But it was him. Simon Creel was alive. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what Landon had said. If Simon was alive, then who the hell did Landon bury? And why did he think he was being followed? I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house made me flinch. I started to convince myself it was all just a dying man's delusion. A guilty conscience eating away at him until the doorbell rang. It was 2:17. In the morning, no one should have been there. I froze in place. It rang again. I walked to the peephole, slowly, and when I looked through it, I felt my blood turn to ice. Standing on my porch was Simon Creel, or someone who looked exactly like him. Same blank expression, same cheap hoodie, same posture, like a mannequin left out in the rain. He didn't knock again, didn't move, just stood there, staring at the door. I didn't open it. I waited, eventually. He turned and walked down the steps. I watched him disappear into the street, swallowed by the dark. But before he vanished completely, he looked back and smiled. I didn't sleep after that. How could I? I sat in the living room all night with the lights on, a baseball bat gripped tight in both hands like some kind of idiot. My heart wouldn't stop pounding. Not because I thought he was going to break in, but because of the way he looked at me before he walked away. Like he knew me. Like this was just the beginning. I kept replaying Landon's final words over and over in my head. He knows I told you. I don't think he stayed dead. And now Simon Creel, or whatever that was, had shown up on my porch just hours after Landon's death. It couldn't be coincidence. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. By the time the sun came up, I'd talked myself into believing it had to be a case of mistaken identity. Maybe it was someone who looked like Simon. Maybe it was a sick joke. Or maybe, just maybe, Landon wasn't all there at the end. The confession, the fear, the paranoia. Maybe it was just the cancer eating away at his brain. Morphine hallucinations. An old name from our past, dredged up by painkillers and guilt. But none of that explained how a man who was supposedly murdered and buried over a decade ago was now alive and standing outside my door around 7:45 a.m. I brewed a pot of coffee and finally sat down at my computer to dig deeper into Simon Creel. I couldn't shake the image of his face, the one from the porch, the one from the author event, linked the night before. I needed answers. Something. Anything. The author website was minimal. Plain white background. No bio. Just a headshot. A list of local bookstore appearances. And one book, title, The Roots Beneath. I clicked through to the description. It was vague. Something about buried trauma. The sins of small towns. The things we leave in the dirt that eventually find their way back to the surface. Sounded like a metaphor, but to me, It read like a confession. The book wasn't available online. No ebook, no preview. The only copies, apparently, were sold locally at signings. One of those signings was happening that Friday, 2 towns over. I stared at the event page for a long time. Part of me wanted to go to confront him, to ask him straight up, "Who are you? Do you remember Landon? Why are you pretending to be someone you're not?" But a deeper part of me, the part I usually ignore, told me not to. That same quiet instinct you get when you're walking alone at night and you hear footsteps behind you, and instead of turning around, you just walk faster. Not because you're sure someone's there, but because you might be right later that afternoon. I went through one of Landon's old photo albums. Back before everything went to hell between us, we were close. We were those kinds of brothers that people assumed were twins, even though I was 3 years older. Always together, riding bikes through the Belwick woods, skipping stones in the creek, sneaking into the old quarry after dark to scare each other. One photo stopped me cold. It was from the summer of 2010. Landon, me, and 4 other guys sitting on a fallen log in the forest, cigarettes in hand, beers between our feet, smirks frozen in cheap camera flash. Third from the left, grinning like he didn't have a care in the world, Simon Creel. I held the photo up to the screen, compared it to the image from the author website. Same face, same uneven teeth, same sharp jawline and deep-set eyes. The only difference was time. 14 years and change. No one told me he'd been found. No one ever said he came back. I googled Simon Creel found and Simon Creel missing. 2010 Belwick. Nothing new. Still listed as missing. Cold case. No updates. No resolution. Yet there he was, right now, doing book signings to towns. Over under his real name. Like nothing had ever happened. That's when I made the mistake of clicking the contact the author link on the website. It was just a text box with an email field and a send message button. I typed, "Hi Simon. I'm reaching out because I think we may have crossed paths years ago in Belwick. I knew Landon Mercer. I saw your website. I just want to talk." I hit send, immediately regretted it. Closed the laptop, walked away that night. I triple-checked the locks, closed every curtain, left a kitchen light on the way I used to when I was a kid and scared of the dark. Around 1:30. A.M. I was finally starting to drift off on the couch when I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. Same rhythm as before, calm, patient. I froze. Didn't move, didn't breathe. The knocks came again. Knock, knock, knock. I forced myself up, inching toward the door. This time, I didn't even check the peephole. I knew who it would be. I stood there, just inches from the door, heart slamming against my ribs, barely able to hear over the ringing in my ears. And then, a voice muffled, low but unmistakable. He didn't bury me deep enough. I staggered backward like I'd been punched. The voice was right next to the door. Not angry, not demanding, just there, then silence. I waited a full minute before opening the door. The porch was empty, the street dead quiet. No footsteps, no retreating shadow. Nothing, just a faint smell of earth, like freshly dug soil, the next morning. I found the reply. Simon had responded to my message. His email was simple. "You're not supposed to remember, but since you do, I think we should meet. Friday, at the signing. I'll recognize you. And you'll finally understand what Landon did." No signature, no contact info. Just that. I stared at it for a long time, my hands shaking. It was starting to feel like my life had been hijacked by a story I didn't realize I was part of. Like some book I'd never read was now writing me into its final chapter. And it scared the hell out of me, because if Simon was dead, if my brother did bury him, and if this man wasn't Simon, then what the hell was standing on my porch? And why did it know my name? After Simon's reply, I didn't eat, didn't sleep, couldn't think about anything else. The line, "You're not supposed to remember," kept echoing in my head. It felt like a threat disguised as sympathy, like he wasn't just telling me something sinister, he was warning me. And somehow, even though the man on my porch looked exactly like the boy from that photo in 2010, I knew this wasn't the same Simon Creel. Not really. Something was wrong in a way that logic couldn't touch. Something deeper than just facts and timelines. And that feeling, the one I hadn't had since I was a kid, was finally pushed me to open the old, wooden trunk in Landon's garage. The one we were never allowed to touch growing up. My parents kept it locked for years, ever since we moved back from Belwick in 2011 after everything happened. It had belonged to our grandfather originally, passed down to Dad, then shoved in the garage under boxes of Christmas decorations and moldy old National Geographics. When Landon moved into the house after Dad died, I guess he never touched it either, but the lock was broken now. The metal latch rusted. Through like time had been chewing on it. Inside were stacks of papers, Polaroids, spiral notebooks, a tape recorder, a switchblade, a Ziploc bag filled with something dark and brittle dead leaves, I think. But they smelled like firewood and iron, and a folder labeled, "Do not open, Landon Mercer." Belwick summer, I sat cross-legged on the floor and opened it. Inside was a journal. Not the kind with flowers or dates, just a plain composition book, pages yellowed and stiff. Landon's handwriting was unmistakable, all sharp slashes and barely their vowels dot the first page. Said, "If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it. I know I shouldn't write this down, but I can't carry it anymore. The forest remembers everything." That was all it took. I read the whole thing in one sitting, according to the journal. Something happened at a bonfire in Belwick this summer. Simon went missing. Landon and a few others, Tyler Reese, McCoe, had met in the clearing like they always did. They'd been drinking, smoking, talking about leaving town. Growing up, Simon was there too, but he wasn't part of their inner circle. He just showed up, according to Landon, sat down at the fire without saying anything, stared at the flames, gave them all the creeps. Then he started talking about something called the Deep Root, a local myth, supposedly an underground god or curse that watched the woods, listened through the trees. He said the forest had a memory, and that they were all in it now, that something was coming for them, and it would start with blood. They thought he was high, or messing with them, until Simon pulled out a knife. Landon's handwriting grew jagged after that. He said it wanted a sacrifice, that the spiral needed to be opened again. Reese laughed. Micah told him to shut the hell up. Then Simon walked into the woods and told us to follow. We did. That was the last night Simon Creel was ever seen alive. I don't know what happened after that. The journal pages were torn, ripped violently from the spine. Whatever Landon had written, whatever confession he'd made, he must have destroyed it. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of guilt. But he left one final note at the end, scrawled in shaky black ink. We didn't just bury Simon. We buried a door and I think it's opening again. I felt sick. I didn't know what disturbed me more, the cryptic language, the mention of sacrifice, or the fact that Landon really believed it. This wasn't the brother I knew, but then again, maybe I'd never really known him. I took photos of every page that survived, tucked the journal back into the folder. My hands were shaking the entire time as I closed the trunk. Something fell from the lid, a Polaroid, stuck to the wood by decades of damp dust. It fluttered to the floor. I picked it up. It was a photo of the bonfire, same one from the photo album. Only this one had been taken from inside the woods, behind the group, like someone was watching. Everyone was visible in the frame. Tyler, Reese, Micah, Landon, and Simon, sitting cross-legged in the dirt. Only he wasn't looking at the fire. He was staring directly into the camera, and his eyes were completely black. I spent the rest of the night rereading Landon's journal and cross-referencing every name he mentioned. Tyler had drowned in 2014. Reese died in a house fire in 2016. Micah vanished in 2019, after a party declared a missing person. Never found. Landon died last week. That left me the kid who wasn't even there that night, the one Landon tried to protect by cutting him out of his life. And now Simon was knocking on my door. Don't know what's happening. I don't know who or what Simon is, but I do know one thing. This didn't start with Landon's confession. It started in the woods, and if I want answers, I think I'm going to have to go back there. I hadn't been back to Belwick in over a decade. The last time I drove through, it was the summer after Landon's graduation, right before we moved away. The town had always been quiet, tucked between two long stretches of pine-covered highway, like it had something to hide. But this time, it felt emptier. Not physically, the buildings were still there. The same rusted road signs, the gas station with one pump always broken, the diner with the chipped neon sign. It was emptier in a different way, like the town itself had hollowed out from the inside, like it had forgotten how to be a town. I parked outside the Belwick Public Library, a squat brick building I hadn't stepped into since middle school. I figured it was the safest place to start, because if there's one thing you can rely on more than memory, it's records. And I needed to know, officially, if Simon Creel had ever existed. Inside, it was dead silent. The librarian behind the desk looked like she hadn't blinked since 1980. Thin wire glasses, pencil skirt, a beige cardigan that blended into the wall. She watched me approach, but didn't smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice dry as dust. "Yeah," I said. "I'm doing some research on a missing person." She raised a brow. "Police matter?" "No, just personal." His name was Simon Creel. Disappeared around 2010. He was a year ahead of me. "In school," she frowned. "Creel." I nodded. She tapped a few keys on her terminal, waited, then said, "There's no record of anyone by that name." I blinked. "In the town, or in the system?" "In either," she said. I leaned forward. "Could you check school records? Yearbooks, maybe?" He was in Belwick High, would have graduated around 2011. More typing, a long pause, no Creel. "In any of the senior class records for that year, or the one before, or after?" I felt the air shift. Could he have transferred? She added, like it would help. "No," I said. "He lived here. I remember him." She smiled gently. "Memory is tricky." I spent the next 2 hours digging through old newspapers in the microfilm section. Nothing, no. Reports of a disappearance, No police bulletins, not even a classified ad. It was like Simon Creel had never existed, except I knew he had. He was in the photo, he was in Landon's journal, and more than anything else, he was on my porch after the library. I drove to the high school. It looked the same, beige bricks, moss creeping up the corners, a flagpole leaning slightly eastward like it had given up. I asked to speak with the guidance counselor. A short woman named Mrs. Daly met me in the lobby. I remembered her vaguely from my own school days, mostly that she always smelled like butterscotch and had a voice like a wind chime. Simon Creel, she repeated, furrowing her brow. I don't think I know that name. He went missing the summer of 2010, I said. He was quiet, pale, kept to himself. Probably didn't have a ton of friends. She shook her head slowly. I was here back then. I don't remember a student by that name. And I would have remembered a disappearance. Trust me. She smiled with a kind of vacant sympathy that made my stomach turn. I'm sorry, maybe you've got the wrong town. No, I didn't. Before I left. I walked out to the edge of the school football field. Beyond the bleachers and the practice track was a trailhead, overgrown now, but still visible. The path that led toward the woods, toward the old bonfire clearing. Journals said they used to meet there often, party, drink, light fires, whisper stupid stories about forest gods and curses and the deep root. And that one night, Simon never came back. I stared into the woods and felt the air go still, not quiet, still like the trees were holding their breath. I ended the day at the cemetery. Belwick only has one. Hollow Pine Memorial, and it's exactly what you'd expect from a small town, where no one's moved in or out for 20 years. Crooked headstones, family names repeated every few feet. Wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe confirmation that he'd been buried. Maybe a headstone to prove. The memory wasn't just mine, but I found nothing, no. Simon Creel, no freshly turned soil, no beloved son, or taken too soon. Instead, I found something worse. Near the back of the cemetery, past the iron fence that lined the wooded edge, I found a small pile of rocks, carefully stacked, too neatly placed to be random, and next to them, nestled between roots like a gift, a child's tooth, not old, not weathered, still faintly red at the base. I backed away and tried not to throw up. The woods creaked softly behind me. Something had been here. Something was watching. Back at my motel that night, I turned on the shower just to drown out the silence. When I came out, towel around my waist. The bathroom mirror was fogged up completely, but 4 letters had been smeared clean. S-I-M-O. Nye didn't scream. I just stared. The steam kept rising, and in the mirror's reflection, I swore I saw something standing in the shadows behind me. When I turned around, the room was empty. Belwick hadn't forgotten Simon Creel. It had been made to forget, and whatever was left of him hadn't forgotten me. I couldn't leave Belwick without seeing it for myself. The clearing where Simon disappeared, where Landon said it all went wrong. It was just a few hundred yards past the trailhead behind Belwick High, the one we used to ride our bikes down during summers. I parked at the edge of the practice field and walked in, flashlight in hand, boots sinking slightly in the damp soil. The forest swallowed sound. I heard nothing but my own footsteps. I followed the path Landon described in his journal, the one that forked twice, then opened into a small bowl-shaped clearing surrounded by birch trees. When I stepped into it, everything felt off, like the trees were leaning in just slightly, like the air was thinner. It didn't look like a place for a party anymore. It looked like a graveyard. At the center, I found the remnants of an old fire pit. Cracked rocks arranged in a rough ring, scattered beer bottles half buried in leaves. A rusted lawn chair tipped on its side. I stood there in the middle, trying to imagine it. The night, the shouting, Simon's voice trembling as he talked about sacrifices and forest gods, the flare of panic when things turned violent. Landon never said how they killed him, only that they made sure he didn't get up again, and then buried him near a tree with a spiral carved into the bark. I turned slowly, scanning every tree I could see, every knot and split in the trunks, and then I saw it just beyond the edge of the clearing. A large, gnarled oak, and carved into the bark, aged and worn, but still visible, was a spiral, rough, almost childlike, but unmistakable. I stepped closer. The base of the tree was soft, fresh earth, like someone had dug there recently. I dropped to my knees, hands in the dirt, scooping slowly at first. That's when I found something. A shoelace, torn, frayed, stained a dark brown and deeper. A strip of fabric, shirt material. Checked pattern, the kind Simon used to wear. Then I hit something harder, a Ziploc bag. Inside, I saw the edge of an old cell phone, flip style, dead, but intact. The label inside the bag said, MICAH, -2010. My blood ran cold. Micah, one of the boys from that night, one of the ones who had died later. His phone was buried here, not Simon's. What the hell was going on? Back at the motel, I plugged the phone into a USB charging adapter and prayed it would power on. It did, to my shock. The battery still held enough juice to blink to life. Password locked. But after 3 wrong guesses, a backup screen popped up. Access emergency voicemail archive. I clicked yes. Only one message existed, timestamped. August 14th, 2010, 3:17 a.m. The night it happened, I hit play. The audio was crackly. But the voice, it was Micah, frightened, breathless. It wasn't supposed to go like this. I don't know what Landon's doing. We didn't kill him. I mean, he stopped moving, yeah, but he wasn't dead. I swear he wasn't. And Landon? He kept hitting him, over and over. Said we had to finish it. Said the forest wouldn't take him unless he was fully dead. Pause, crying, but he got up, later, hours later. We were still there, talking about what to do, and he just stood up, eyes black, like not human, and he smiled. I ran. I left them there. I think I'm next. The recording ended. I sat there, hands shaking, heart rattling inside my chest like a bird in a cage. They didn't kill Simon, at least. Not at first. Something happened to him in that forest. Something took him, and now, 14 years later, he was walking around like nothing ever happened. I started rereading Landon's journal that night, desperate for any mention of Micah or the phone buried on the last page, in a tiny scrawl at the very bottom. I found something I'd missed. Micah's phone is buried at the tree. He recorded what he saw. I didn't want to destroy it. Part of me wanted someone to know. If you're reading this, maybe it's you. There was a knocking sound, then dot. Not at the door, at the window, soft, deliberate. I froze, turned slowly, and there he was, Simon, staring at me from the other side. Of the glass, same face, same clothes, but this time his skin looked grey, like it had been pulled from deep underground. His lips were dry, cracked. His eyes were wrong, not just black, but moving, like they had depth. I backed away from the window. I didn't scream. I didn't dare. Simon didn't move. He didn't blink. He just raised his hand and pointed at me. Then, slowly, he traced a spiral in the fog on the window with his fingertip and vanished into the night. I didn't sleep. I barely even breathed. By morning, the spiral was gone. The window was clean, but my hands still smelled like the dirt from that grave. And the truth, whatever it was, had already started to rot its way into me. I was no longer an observer in this story. I was part of it, and Simon was just getting started. I returned to the tree the next morning. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe to find it gone, like the woods had rearranged themselves in the night to erase my memories. Maybe I hoped the shoelace and the bag and the phone had all been some kind of shared hallucination between me, stress, and grief. But it was all still there, only different. The spiral carved into the bark looked deeper, like it had been freshly recut during the night. There were small flakes of wood scattered beneath it, pale and soft, like flesh peeled away. The dirt at the base of the tree, where I'd dug up Micah's phone, was no longer flat. It had been disturbed, like something had been digging out. There were fresh claw marks in the soil, thin, ragged gouges about the width of fingers, but deeper, angrier, soil tossed aside, roots broken. Something had come from underneath the tree and walked away. I took photos, video, a sample of the soil in a sandwich bag from the motel. I don't know why, like I thought maybe someone would believe me if I had enough physical evidence. But I was starting to realize this wasn't about belief, it was about memory. Something was changing the way people remembered Simon, maybe even erasing him entirely. And if that was the case, then the only thing keeping him anchored here, the only person who still remembered, was me. I returned to the motel and pulled up the author website again. Simon's event was still scheduled for Friday, 2 days away. I clicked refresh. The headshot was gone. The About the Author section was blank now. Just a grey box with 404, page not found. Even stranger, my browser history showed that I'd never visited the site before. The cached version was wiped. No trace, no record of my email to him. But his message to me was still there in my inbox. So I knew I wasn't crazy, at least not completely, that afternoon. I drove to the Town Historical Society, a tiny cottage turndoffice just behind the Belwick post office. The woman who answered the door was elderly, white-haired, kind in a distracted way. Her name was Judith Bean, and she'd lived in Belwick all her life. When I asked her about Simon Creel, she didn't hesitate. Simon Creel, she said, chewing on the name. Sure, I knew his mother. Edith worked at the diner, lived near Hollow Pine, had a boy with her, yes, real quiet. She frowned. But he moved, didn't he? Years ago. No ma'am, I said. He disappeared, went missing in 2010. That's what I've heard. She stared at me like I'd just told her the sky had fallen. No, that's not right, she said slowly. I remember seeing him at the summer fair, the year the dunk tank broke. He was with your brother, Landon. She nodded. Yes, him. What year? Oh, now you're testing me. She squinted at the ceiling. I think it was after the big fire at the mill. That'd be 2011, or maybe 12. But Simon disappeared in 2010. She looked confused. That can't be. I opened my phone, searched Simon Creel missing. Nothing, no results, no police bulletin, no articles. I showed her the blank screen. She tilted her head, puzzled, and then something shifted behind her eyes, like a curtain being drawn from the inside. "I'm sorry," she said abruptly. "I don't think I know that name." I blinked. "You just said, must have been someone else. Lots of Creels, upstate." She closed the door a little tighter. I didn't push it. I just said thank you, turned around, and walked straight back to my car. That night, I returned to the motel and locked every door and window. I covered the mirror in the bathroom. I unplugged the TV. I turned off my phone. Then I sat in bed and reread Landon's final journal entry, tracing the shaky loops of his handwriting like it could offer me some kind of answer. We didn't just bury Simon, we buried a door, and I think it's opening again. My phone buzzed. Even though I'd powered it off, it lit up on the nightstand with a new notification, unknown. Number -1, new voicemail. I hadn't heard it ring. I hadn't given anyone my number. I pressed play. The message was only 5 seconds long. "He's under your bed." I launched up, grabbing the bat from beside the nightstand, every hair on my body standing straight up. I dropped to the floor and looked. Underneath the bed, nothing but the floor beneath the mattress was wet and muddy, fresh. Soil, a small trail of it, led to the door, and across the motel carpet were footprints, bare, human, leading from the bed to the mirror I had covered. The sheet draped over it had been pulled just slightly aside, as if someone had looked at themselves and wanted me to see. I backed into the corner and didn't move for hours. By dawn, the footprints were gone, but the smell of earth lingered, and on the mirror, drawn in the fog from my breath, was the spiral again. But this time, beneath it, he'd written 2 words, "Keep remembering." I think I finally understand this thing, this version of Simon that keeps showing up, wants to be remembered, not by everyone, just by me, because I was never part of that night, because I wasn't there when he died, because I didn't bury him, and now I think he's chosen me to dig the rest of it up. After what happened at the motel, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to talk to someone who was there the night. Simon disappeared. Someone who remembered more than I did. Someone still alive. The journal had mentioned 4 names: Landon, Reese, Micah, and Tyler. I knew what happened to Landon, dead, just last week. I'd found Micah's old phone, and from what I'd gathered online, he vanished in 2019, never found. Reese had died in a fire in 2016, the report said. Electrical accidental, which left one name, Tyler Franks. I remembered him vaguely, tall, blonde, always had a flask in his hoodie. He was older than Landon by a year or 2. The kind of guy who always seemed like he was already over it, even when we were kids. And according to a Reddit comment on a now-deleted thread about the Belwick disappearance, he was still alive, living out in a camper behind his uncle's property on the outskirts of Clary Junction, just 40 minutes away. I drove out that night. The roads were dark and narrow, flanked by forests that looked like they could swallow your car whole if you took the wrong turn. When I pulled up the dirt road to the address, my headlights cut across an old mailbox, nearly bent in half from rust dot. The camper came into view slowly, half buried in tall grass. A porch light flickered once, then went out completely. I knocked, no answer. Knocked again. I was about to leave when I heard a click from behind the door. A curtain shifted, and then the lock, UNLATCHED. Tyler opened the door, eyes bloodshot, hand trembling. He stared at me for a long time. "You're Landon's brother," he finally said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He stepped aside. "Get in. If he followed you, I'm not dying outside." The inside of the camper looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Cigarette butts overflowed in a warped ashtray. There were claw marks, actual claw marks, on the inside of the window near the kitchenette. A salt circle lined the perimeter of the couch. The entire place smelled like sweat, mildew, and burnt plastic. But it was the books that stood out. The most, dozens of them. Old, cracked paperbacks stacked in towers. Demonology, Appalachian folklore, rituals of the Black Root, tree worship in rural America, and one I'll never forget. He who grows beneath the spiral doctrine. Tyler sat down and poured a shot of something brown and mean-smelling. Didn't offer me any. He lit a cigarette and exhaled like he'd been holding the breath for years. "So," he said, "you've seen him too." I nodded slowly. "He's been showing up ever since Landon died." Tyler rubbed his eyes. "He was always going to come back. I told them that. I told him that. But Landon thought if we buried him deep enough, burned the clothes, burned the knife, never said his name again, he trailed off." I waited. "But it doesn't work like that," he whispered. "You can't forget a place like that. Not if it chose you." He looked up at me. "Do you remember the clearing?" "Yes, you shouldn't. You weren't even there." I opened my mouth to argue, but he shook his head. "The forest remembers," he said. "That's how it starts." Told him about the tree, the spiral, the grave. He nodded along, eyes darting toward the windows as if the trees outside were listening. "It wasn't Simon," he said. I froze. What? It looked like him, it talked like him, but it wasn't Simon anymore. Not after that night. He stood up and opened a drawer, pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside was a photo, the same group photo I had. The one from that summer. But this one was different, because in this version, there was no Simon. He wasn't there. Everything else was identical. Landon, Tyler, Micah, Reese. But Simon's spot, on the log, empty, like he'd been erased. "You see it too," Tyler muttered. "They keep changing. Every time I look, it's different. He's peeling himself out of the past. Like memory is soft clay, and he's reshaping it." I stared at the photo, my stomach dropping. "I saw him," I whispered, "last night. He left me a message." Tyler nodded. "Let me guess. He told you to keep remembering." I looked up, startled. He grinned bitterly. "That's how he spreads. Every person who remembers him becomes an anchor. And the more anchors he has, the more real he becomes." I was shaking now. "What does?" "He won." Tyler exhaled smoke into the air and whispered, "He wants to be born again." He told me the full story then. The part Landon left out. They didn't kill Simon in anger. They didn't do it out of fear. They did it because Simon asked them to. He said the thing in the forest had chosen him, Tyler explained. Said he had to be buried under the spiral. Said if he was, it would unlock the next door. Landon thought it was just a sick joke, a cult prank. But when Simon cut his own arm and poured the blood onto the roots, things started happening. Trees bent, shadows moved. Something rose in the fog, something that wasn't smoke, and when Simon begged them to finish it, they did. Reese hit him first, Tyler whispered, then Micah, then Landon. He wiped his eyes. I held him down. Tyler said he hadn't slept for more than 2 hours a night in over a decade. That Simon appeared every time he closed his eyes. Sometimes he was still bleeding, sometimes he was smiling, but always watching, and the moment he heard Landon was dead. He knew it would come for him next. You brought it here, he said to me. You're the memory now. You're the last thread. I opened my mouth to ask what that meant, but then all the lights went out. A loud thump hit the roof of the camper. Then another, scraping like nails across aluminum. Tyler stood, breathing fast. He grabbed a crowbar from behind the couch and held it like a sword. Then the skylight, above us, went black. Something had blocked it, and a face pressed against the glass. Simon, or what was left of him. His skin was paper-thin, eyes blacker than tar, and in the glass, he began drawing the spiral, over and over, faster and faster. Tyler screamed. He swung at the ceiling. The glass shattered, and just before the lights flickered back on, Simon was gone. We didn't speak after that. Tyler handed me a knife, old, worn, but clean. This is the one we used, he said. Keep it close. If he comes to you, and he will, you'll need to give him what he wants. What's that? Memory, Tyler said, or blood, sometimes both. I left the camper just after 3 a.m. Tyler watched me from the porch, the crowbar still in his hand, and as I drove away down that winding dirt road, I saw something in my rearview mirror. Simon, standing at the edge of the tree line, smiling. After my encounter with Tyler, I was desperate for answers. Tyler's camper was cluttered with old books on folklore and ritual, but one stood out, He Who Grows Beneath, the Spiral Doctrine. The cover was faded, the pages brittle, but the writing inside felt urgent, like a warning from someone who had been too close to the darkness. I took the book with me that night, staying at a cheap motel just outside Clary Junction. I turned off the TV, closed the curtains tight, and settled in with a notebook and a flashlight. The Spiral Doctrine wasn't just folklore, it was a manual, a blueprint. The spiral, it explained, was an ancient symbol found in cultures all over the world, but particularly among Appalachian tribes and early European settlers. It represented cycles, life, death, rebirth. But here, in this text, it took on a more sinister meaning. The spiral was a gateway, a doorway between worlds, one that could only be opened by blood and memory. The forest itself, the deep roots Simon had mentioned, was alive. It remembered everything that had happened within its borders, and it grew stronger with every secret buried beneath the soil. Every life taken, every name forgotten. The doctrine laid out rituals to open the spiral, sacrifices, blood rites, and invocations. Most chilling was the concept of the anchor. An anchor was a living person who carried the memory of the spiral's last opening, who remembered the names, the faces, the events. Anchors kept the gate open, and Simon was no longer human. He had become the ultimate anchor. There were diagrams of spirals within spirals, maps layered with symbols and coordinates. One map caught my eye. It showed a series of spirals, dotted across Belwick and surrounding areas, connected by thin lines that looked like roots. At the center was the largest spiral, the one carved into the oak tree where Simon was buried. The other spirals were smaller, but they aligned perfectly with the grave sites of Tyler, Reese, Micah, and Landon. The book ended with a warning. When the anchor calls, the gates will open again. Blood will water the roots. The spiral will grow. I stared at the page. Simon's message to me. The spirals on the map weren't just symbols. They were places. Places where the spiral had already claimed victims, and where it was hungry for more. I realized then that Simon's appearances weren't random, they were a signal, a countdown. The spiral was spreading, and I was standing right in its path. Armed with the Spiral Doctrines map, I knew what I had to do. If the spirals marked graves or worse, gateways, then visiting each site was the only way to understand what was happening. The first spiral after the big oak tree was located just outside Belwick, near a run-down farmhouse long abandoned. I drove out early, the sun barely above the horizon, the air thick with fog. The farmhouse looked like something out of a nightmare, peeling paint, broken windows, and a porch sagging under years of neglect. At the back of the house, half covered by overgrown brush, I found the spiral carved deep into the weathered siding. The ground beneath was freshly disturbed nearby. A shallow grave was marked only by a twisted old branch. I dug carefully with my hands. Inside, I found a battered leather wallet. Inside the wallet, an ID card. The name on it was Reese Marshall. Reese's disappearance had been reported as a fire accident years ago, but the spiral and the grave told a different story, that he hadn't died by accident, that someone or something had buried him here. The second spiral was in an old quarry. Several miles away, I reached it just before dusk. The circle was carved into a huge limestone boulder. Around it, I found other signs of recent presence: cigarette butts, torn fabric, and footprints in the mud. Near the spiral was a crudely made wooden cross with a name scratched into it. Micah Fields. Micah's name again. This time, the grave looked fresh as I documented the sites. I started noticing patterns. The spiral wasn't just a symbol or a myth. It was a network, a series of points, connected beneath the surface, feeding into something much larger. Each spiral marked a place where the forest had claimed a victim and where the spiral was growing. Back at the motel that night, I received a call. No caller ID. I answered. A distorted voice whispered, "You're next." Then the line went dead. I knew the spiral was expanding and that I was in its path. Simon wasn't just a ghost from the past. He was a harbinger, and the spiral was only beginning to awaken. The call haunted me long after I hung up. "You're next." Those words weren't just a threat. They were a promise, because as I drove back into Belwick the next day, I noticed something I hadn't before. Symbols strange, twisted spirals scrawled on street signs, spray painted on utility poles, scratched into the bark of trees. They were everywhere. At first, I thought it was some kind of graffiti prank, but these weren't random doodles. They matched the spirals from the book. Started photographing every spiral I found. Some were small, barely larger than a coin. Others stretched across entire walls or fences. One was carved into the side of the Belwick diner where Edith Creel used to work. I wondered if she ever noticed them, if she was trying to tell me something. That evening, I stopped by the diner to ask around. But the place was nearly empty. A few locals nursing coffee, eyes flicking nervously toward the door. I spoke with the waitress, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes. "Have you seen these?" I asked, showing her a photo of the spiral. She swallowed hard. "Yeah," she said. "They've been showing up everywhere. People are scared." "Scared of what?" She hesitated. "Disappearances." She lowered her voice. "Kids, mostly. Folks who go out into the woods and never come back. Some think it's the spiral. Others say it's just the forest. But no one wants to go near those places anymore." The next day, I checked local news and police reports. A series of missing person cases over the past year. All teenagers or young adults, all last seen near the spiral sites on the map. No leads, no suspects, just a growing silence. I reached out to the local sheriff's office. The deputy who answered was curt. "Look, stranger," he said, "we don't have time for ghost stories or cult conspiracies." I mentioned Simon Creel, Landon Mercer, the spiral doctrine. He laughed. "Never heard of them. If you want to stir up trouble, go ahead. But around here, we handle facts." Still, the symbols kept appearing. One night, as I walked back to my motel, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the woods. Tall, shadowed, unmoving. I froze. The figure stepped forward, revealing a face I thought I'd never see again. Simon, his eyes black as night, his smile cold. He reached out a hand, and I felt the air shift. A whisper filled my ears. Words I couldn't understand, but felt deep in my bones. The spiral was calling. I ran back inside. I locked every door and window, but when I looked in the mirror, I saw it. The spiral, drawn in condensation, and beneath it, a new message. The root grows deeper. I don't know how much longer I can fight this. The spiral is spreading. The disappearances, the symbols, Simon's appearances. It's all connected, and every day I feel it pulling me closer. Closer to the forest, closer to the spiral. The forest had been calling me for weeks. Not with words, but with a feeling. A low hum beneath my skin. A pulse in the air that grew stronger every time Simon appeared. Every time I saw those spirals etched into the town, I knew I couldn't run from it anymore. If the spiral was growing, spreading, feeding, then the source had to be deep inside those woods. The deep root, as Landon's journal called it. So one grey morning, I packed a bag with the essentials: water, flashlight, knife, the old spiral doctrine book, and set out. The trailhead was exactly where I remembered, overgrown but visible, marked by a crooked wooden sign that read Hollow Pine Preserve. As soon as I stepped past it, the sounds of the town faded away. Birdsong disappeared, wind stilled. The forest swallowed me whole. The deeper I walked, the heavier the air became. The trees thickened, their branches weaving overhead like an ancient cathedral. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting strange shifting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Every few steps, I spotted spirals carved into bark, scratched into stones, even woven from twisted vines. They led me onward, a creeping trail of breadcrumbs through a world that felt both alive and watching. Hours passed. My legs ached. The sky darkened beneath the thick canopy. Just when I was about to turn back, I saw it. A clearing, not like the one where Simon was buried, but a place so quiet it felt wrong. The ground here was blackened and soft, like it had been watered with blood at its center. A massive tree towered over everything. Its bark was knotted and twisted into the spiral pattern. But this one was carved so deep it seemed to breathe. Roots burst from the soil, thick and gnarled, curling like giant snakes. I stepped closer, heart pounding, beneath the roots. I saw something glinting in the dirt. I knelt down and pulled it free. A rusted ancient knife, the same design Tyler had given me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Suddenly, the wind whispered through the branches. Low, guttural voices seemed to echo from the roots themselves. I heard a name, Simon. I felt the ground shift beneath me. The roots writhed like living things. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. Then, from the shadows, figures emerged. At first, they looked human, familiar. Landon, Micah, Reese, Tyler, all of them. But their skin was pale and mottled, their eyes hollow and black. They moved slowly, as if pulled by invisible strings. They reached out to me with clawed hands. I stumbled backward, but the roots tangled around my ankles. The spiral was alive. It wanted me, wanted my blood, my memory in a desperate move. I raised the knife and slashed. At the roots. They recoiled. The figures hissed and vanished into the darkness. The clearing fell silent, breathing hard. I looked up. Above me, the spiral carved into the tree pulsed faintly. A voice echoed in my mind. You remember? You are the anchor. I realized then what I had to do to stop the spiral. I had to face it, to break the cycle. I had to unravel the memory it fed on, or be consumed by it forever. I turned away from the deep root, knowing I'd have to return stronger, ready, because this was no longer just a story, it was my life. When I left the deep root, I felt like I was carrying a weight far heavier than the knife in my hand. The forest had whispered its secrets, and I wasn't sure I wanted to hear them. But now that I knew, there was no going back. The spiral wasn't just a symbol carved in trees or painted on walls. It was a curse, a cycle of blood and memory, woven into the roots of my family. That night, back in my motel room, I pored over Landon's journal again, more carefully this time. Among the scattered notes and frantic scribbles, one passage caught my eye. It was different, a letter addressed to me, though I'd never seen it before. To whoever finds this, the spiral is not just a thing in the forest. It's a part of us, of me, of Simon, and now of you. We tried to bury it, to forget it, but it's still here, and it's hungry. To break the cycle, you have to remember differently. You have to face what we couldn't, the root of the spiral, and make it stop. I didn't understand what remembered differently meant, but I knew I had to try. The next morning, I started calling historians, folklorists, and local elders who might know more about the spiral doctrine and its roots in Appalachian folklore. Most ignored me. Some thought I was a conspiracy theorist, but one woman answered, an anthropologist named Dr. Evelyn Harper, who specialized in indigenous symbols and rituals of the region. I told her everything, the disappearances, the spirals, the forest. She listened quietly. Then she said something that chilled me. The spiral is a symbol of cycles, birth, death, and rebirth. But in some traditions, it's also a gateway to something else. A place where memories become physical, where time folds back on itself. She paused. If the spiral is growing, it means the cycle is repeating. And whoever carries the memory, the anchor is tied to it until the cycle breaks. I asked her how to break it. She hesitated. Some say you must confront the source directly, a ritual of remembrance, but also release, a way to undo the ties without losing yourself. That night, I sat staring at the knife from the deep root, thinking about Simon, Landon, and the others, about my family. and what had been buried long before any of us were born. I realized the spiral wasn't just a force outside me, it was inside me. And if I wanted to stop it, I had to face it, not just in the forest, but in my own blood. The next day, I visited my mother's old house in Belwick. It was empty now, windows boarded, but the air was thick with memories. I found a box of old family photos and letters. Among them was a faded newspaper, clipping about a fire in the woods, dated 1978. It mentioned a local man named Robert Mercer by grandfather. The article said he died mysteriously near the same forest, his body found with strange spiral marks carved into his skin. No cause of death was ever determined. I dug deeper and found my grandmother's diary in it. She described Robert's obsession with the forest and the spiral. She wrote about his belief that the spiral was a doorway to another world. She wrote about a warning he gave her. If the spiral grows, it will claim us all. We must remember what happened or be lost to it. Suddenly, everything clicked. The spiral wasn't new. It had haunted my family for generations. We were all anchors, tied to this endless cycle of death and rebirth. And Simon's disappearance was just the latest chapter. That night, I prepared for what I knew I had to do. I packed the knife, the journal, the book, and an old family heirloom, a silver locket my grandmother had worn, engraved with a spiral symbol. I drove back to the deep root. The forest was darker than before, thicker. I felt eyes watching me from every shadow. As I approached the massive spiral tree, I saw the figures again. But this time, I didn't run. I stood my ground. I spoke aloud the words from Landon's journal, the invocation Dr. Harper had taught me, and the prayer my grandmother's diary mentioned. I held a knife to my palm and let the blood drip onto the roots. I told the spiral everything, all the pain, the secrets, the guilt, the love, and most of all, the memory. The ground trembled, the roots writhed, the spirals glowed with an eerie light. Then the figures approached, but instead of claws, they reached for my hands. Together, we wove a new spiral, one of release. The forest sighed, the figures faded, the spiral on the tree softened, and for the first time in years, the air felt lighter. I knew the cycle wasn't completely broken. The spiral would always exist, but now I was free, and so was Simon. The morning after the ritual, the forest felt different, less oppressive. The heavy weight that had hung over me for months seemed to lift slightly, like the first thin rays of sun breaking through a storm cloud. But I knew better than to trust relief too easily. The spiral was ancient. It didn't vanish overnight. I drove back into Belwick, the roads twisting through the mist. The town looked quieter than before, as if it too was holding its breath. At the diner, I saw the waitress again. She looked up and smiled faintly, a flicker of recognition in her tired eyes. "You look different," she said. "Maybe," I replied. I wanted to ask her more about the disappearances, about the spirals, about the strange symbols still lingering on walls and signs. But before I could, her expression shifted, wary, almost fearful. "Be careful," she whispered. "Some things don't end with a ritual." That afternoon, I visited the sheriff's office again. This time, the deputy who answered my questions seemed distracted, almost reluctant. When I mentioned Simon Creel, his gaze darkened. "Your brother was involved in something complicated," he said quietly. He pulled out a folder, old yellowed papers. Inside there were statements, photos, A police report I hadn't seen before. It detailed Landon's confession, but the victim he named wasn't Simon. It was someone else. Someone still alive. I sat down hard. The victim was a man named David Harris, a local who had vanished the same night. Simon disappeared. Landon had confessed to attacking him in a fight. Gone wrong. David was never found. And the sheriff suspected Landon had hidden him somewhere in the woods, but now David was showing up at my door, the same way Simon had. That evening, when I returned to the motel, the knocking started again, slow at first, then urgent. I opened the door and found a man standing there, ragged, pale, eyes haunted. David Harris. He told me a story, one that didn't match Landon's confession. He said Landon had tried to save him from the spiral, but the forest had claimed him first. David had been trapped in the deep root, caught between worlds. Simon wasn't the only one lost in the spiral. Others were trapped, waiting to be freed. I realized then that Landon's confession was more than guilt. It was a warning, a plea, that someone else needed to finish what he started. David's visits became more frequent each time. He appeared weaker, more translucent, like he was fading. I knew I had to act, for him, for Simon, for Landon, and for myself. I began researching old maps, family records, anything that could point me toward where David might have been hidden. The answers led me deeper into Belwick's dark history, secrets buried beneath layers of memory and time. One night, as I sifted through my grandmother's diaries and Landon's journals, I uncovered a final note. The spiral is never truly broken. It only waits for the next anchor. Be ready. I felt the weight of those words settle in my chest. The spiral was a living cycle, and I was now in the center of it. But I wasn't alone. David was counting on me, and I was ready to go back into the forest, deeper than ever before. To find him, to save him, and to finally put the spiral to rest. The air was thick with mist when I set out at dawn. There was no turning back now. David's fading visits had become urgent, his voice more desperate, his eyes sunk in shadows. He was slipping away, trapped somewhere deep within the forests. Grasp, I packed only what I needed. The old knife, Landon's journal, the spiral doctrine, and the silver locket, my grandmother's last tether to a family haunted by secrets older than memory. The forest welcomed me like a living thing. Branches scraped against my jacket as I pushed through dense underbrush. Roots twisted like serpents beneath my boots. Every step echoed a heartbeat, slow, steady, pulling me inward. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time lost meaning beneath the canopy. I followed the spirals carved into bark, marked stones, and twisted vines. They glowed faintly. Now, pulsing with an otherworldly light, I could feel the spiral growing stronger. The forest breathing around me. Suddenly, I stumbled into a cavernous hollow. The earth had split open, revealing a pit that plunged into darkness. The smell of damp earth and decay rose from the depths. A soft light glimmered below, the faint glow of phosphorescent fungi clinging to jagged walls. David's voice echoed from the abyss. Help me. I descended carefully, each step a battle against the chill that seeped into my bones at the bottom. I found him, a pale figure slumped against a wall, eyes wide but vacant. His skin was translucent, veins dark and tangled like roots. He reached out with trembling hands. I'm here, I whispered, gripping his wrist. But the spiral wasn't done. The cavern walls seemed to pulse and close, in roots sprouted from the earth. Snaking toward us like hungry fingers, I raised the knife, slicing through the vines as David struggled to stand above us. A spiral of light swirled, the portal between worlds. Suddenly, the figures appeared again. Landon, Simon, Micah, Reese. Not as ghosts, but as twisted echoes. They blocked our path. Eyes hollow, but filled with silent pleas. I understood they weren't enemies, they were warnings. I held up the silver locket, its spiral engraving catching the light. "This ends now," I said. The figures reached for the locket, their forms flickering. I stepped forward, reciting the ritual of release from Landon's journal. Blood dripped from my palm onto the cavern floor. The spiral pulsed violently. The cavern shook, roots writhed and cracked. Light flooded the pit, searing, blinding. When my vision cleared, the figures were gone. David looked at me, clearer now. Breathing steady, the spiral on the cavern wall faded into natural stone. We climbed out together. The forest around us felt lighter. The heavy breath of the spiral lifted. I knew the cycle was fragile. The spiral would always exist, a force entwined with our memories and fears. But that day, I had broken its hold. I had freed David, and for the first time in years, I felt hope as we emerged from the deep root. The sun was rising, light spilling over Belwick, and I knew the story wasn't over. Not truly, but the spiral's grip had weakened, and so had its power over me. The morning sun spilled over Belwick like a soft promise, painting the streets with gold and shadow. After everything, the spiral, the forest, the disappearances, and the ghosts of my brother and his friends, I stepped back into town, feeling hollow but alive. The air smelled cleaner. The oppressive weight that had clouded every moment for months seemed to lift, for the first time in what felt like forever. I could breathe without fear. I returned to the diner, hoping to find some semblance of normalcy. The waitress greeted me with a cautious smile, eyes wide with unsaid questions. "You look different," she said softly. "Maybe," I replied. "Things are ... changing." She nodded, wiping her hands on a faded apron. "People are starting to come back. The missing ones. Or at least, some signs of them. It's like the forest's hold is loosening." But even as hope stirred, I felt the mark of the spiral deep beneath. My skin, not just in the bruises and scars from the forest's claws, but in the memories, the echoes of names, places, and whispers that no one else could hear. The spiral had carved itself into my soul. That night, as I lay in bed, I reached for the silver locket my grandmother had left Mitha, spiral symbol gleaming. Faintly in the moonlight, I traced its curves with trembling fingers, thinking about everything I had lost and everything I had saved. Then I heard it again, a soft tapping at my window, slow, insistent. I pulled back the curtain. No one was there, just the dark silhouette of a tree outside, its branches curling in the unmistakable shape of a spiral. And then, a voice low and distant, almost a whisper in the wind. "The cycle turns. The anchor remains." I realized then that the spiral was not a curse to be broken once and for all. It was a part of the land, the people, and me. A cycle of memory and forgetting, death and rebirth, forever turning like the rings of a tree. And as long as the spiral existed, so would its anchors in the days that followed. I began to notice changes in the town. People seemed quieter, more watchful. Spirals still appeared, but now they felt less like warnings and more like marked signs of connection. The disappearances slowed, the forest's grasp retreating, but never disappearing. I started to write everything down. The journals, the books, the stories, a record for anyone who might come after me, a warning and a guide so they wouldn't forget. Because memory was the key. To hold it too tightly meant becoming trapped. To forget meant letting the spiral grow. The only choice was to remember differently. As dawn broke on a new day, I walked beneath the trees. The spiral carved into the great oak stood proud, its bark warm beneath my fingertips. I whispered a promise. I remember, I release, and for a moment, the forest sighed. The spiral pulsed once more, then settled into stillness. I turned and walked away, knowing this was both an ending and a beginning. Story 2. My grandmother passed away on a Monday morning in early November. She was 94. It wasn't sudden, and it wasn't dramatic. She just went to sleep in her favorite chair by the fireplace and didn't wake up again. She lived in Belridge, Pennsylvania, a tiny town wedged between long-forgotten mining roads and misty valleys that never quite dried out. Her house sat at the end of a gravel lane, surrounded by dense woods that always felt like they were watching. It was the kind of place where the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt hollow. I hadn't been back in years, but after her passing, it fell to me to go through her belongings. My mum refused. She said the house gave her the creeps. My uncle had passed, and the rest of the family had scattered. So I took a few days off work, drove up from Philadelphia, and settled in to clean out a life's worth of memories. At first, it was all what you'd expect. Boxes of photos, dusty old books, long-expired canned goods, crochet supplies, and a few porcelain dolls that stared a little too intently from their shelves. Her bedroom still smelled like lavender and mothballs. The wallpaper was peeling at the corners. The basement was damp, and the lights flickered every time the furnace kicked in. But the attic was different. I didn't even know the house had an attic until I noticed a small pull string in the upstairs hallway. It was hidden behind a coat rack. I had to stand on a stool to reach it. When I tugged it down, the wooden stairs groaned open, like something out of a haunted house. The air that rushed out was thick with dust and age, and something else, something musty and dry like old paper, left to rot in a forgotten library. I clicked on the flashlight on my phone and climbed up, coughing into my sleeve. The attic was cramped and cluttered, filled with boxes, crates, and old furniture draped in yellowing sheets. Cobwebs stretched between rafters like abandoned spider highways. The insulation was visible in places, torn open by rodents or time. I spent the better part of the afternoon sorting through boxes. Most were filled with typical things: holiday decorations, photo albums, clothes from decades past. But then I found an old wooden chest tucked behind a stack of broken chairs. It was locked, not with a modern padlock, but one of those tiny, rusted keyholes you'd find in old diaries or jewelry boxes. I almost left it alone, but curiosity got the better of me. I ended up prying the latch open with the claw end of a hammer. Inside were layers of yellowed paper, newspaper clippings, folded letters, and a few black and white photos. At the very bottom, wrapped in brittle wax paper, was an old manila folder. It had a red sticker in the top right corner, property of Belridge Police Department evidence. That stopped me cold. I sat back on my heels, staring at it. I had no idea why my grandmother would have something like this. She wasn't a cop. She'd never even talked about crime or anything remotely scandalous. I opened the folder slowly, trying not to tear it. Inside was a typewritten police report, faded, with time dated October 13th, 1954. The heading read, "Missing person report name, Elizabeth Harper, age 7. Race, Caucasian hair, blonde eyes, blue last seen. October 10th, 1954, St. Mary's Hollow Trailhead." Belridge Woods. There were several pages, incident summaries, officer interviews, and a few handwritten annotations in the margins. One stuck out immediately. No body, no prints, no signs of struggle. Just gone. Same spiral symbol found on tree again. Witness says girl walked away with someone who wasn't there. I read it again. Walked away with someone who wasn't there. My scalp tingled. Then came the kicker, at the very bottom of the last page. In faint blue pen, someone had scrawled a question across the report. Why was this never filed? I went downstairs and grabbed my laptop. I googled the name Elizabeth Harper, missing child, 1954, Belridge. Nothing, no newspaper archives, no Amber Alerts, no local legends, no mention on missing persons databases, not even a Reddit thread or amateur cold case blog. It was like she never existed. But the report was real-aged, typed on official letterhead, names of officers who'd worked in the Belridge department at the time. I even recognized one surname, Officer L. Corbin. That name matched the last name of my grandmother's sister, Lorraine Corbin, my great-aunt. I had never met her, just a name in old photos. According to my mom, she died young in a fire. And then it clicked. Elizabeth Harper went missing in 1954. The same year my great-aunt Lorraine supposedly died. Same month, even. I sat there for a long time, holding that folder, trying to make sense of it. If this was real, if this little girl had gone missing and was somehow erased from history, then someone had worked hard to bury it, and for some reason, my grandmother had kept a record of it, hidden away where no one would find it. Why? What had she known? And why was the name Elizabeth Harper never mentioned by anyone in our family? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the handwriting. That one final sentence at the bottom of the report. Why was this never filed? And the longer I stared at it, the more it started to feel less like a question, and more like a warning. I didn't sleep that night. I laid there in my grandmother's guest bed, the ceiling fan creaking overhead, staring into the dark while my mind unraveled the threads of a mystery that was never meant to be pulled. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her name stamped in typewriter ink across that old police report. Elizabeth Harper, age 7, missing, October 10th, 1954. But nobody remembered her. No one had ever mentioned her. Not my mum, not my uncle, not even my grandmother. A woman who kept family photos from 4 generations in neat little albums, but had hidden this single manila folder away like a crime. The next morning, I made coffee, cracked open the windows to let the stale air out, and sat at the dining room table with the police file laid out in front of me. Started from the beginning. The report itself was meticulous, unusual for the 1950s. There were witness statements, a timeline of Elizabeth's last known movements, hand-drawn maps of the area near St. Mary's Hollow Trail, and a typed transcript from the responding officer's field notes. The initial report was made by a woman named Marjorie Harper, presumably the girl's mother. She claimed Elizabeth had wandered off during a church picnic held near the trailhead, No one saw her leave. 1 minute she was playing near the tree line with a group of other kids. The next, she was gone. The responding officer, a Sergeant Wayne Hollowell, noted in his field report that the child could not have moved far in the time she was last seen, and that a coordinated search began within 20 minutes. Dogs were brought in, volunteers combed the woods, local farmers opened their barns and sheds, but nothing turned up. No tracks, no blood, no clothing, just gone. And then there were the witness statements. One from a young boy named Henry Cutter, age 10, who had been one of the kids playing near the trees with Elizabeth. His statement, handwritten in shaky, oversized script, was barely legible, but one sentence stood out. Lizzie walked into the woods with the tall girl. I didn't see her face, the tall girl. I reread that line 5 times. There had been no mention of a tall girl in the rest of the report. No one else saw her. No one described anyone matching that figure. In fact, Henry's statement was the only one that even mentioned Elizabeth walking away. Everyone else simply said she was just gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no ransom note, no indication of a runaway. And then there was this, a line buried in Sergeant Hollowell's final entry, written in faded pencil and clearly added later, symbol carved into pine tree near trailhead, resembles spiral. 3rd time this year I stared at that note. 3rd time this year. There were other disappearances. Why didn't the report mention them? Why wasn't that expanded on? I grabbed my laptop and started searching again. I tried every database I could think of, missing persons registries, cold case forums, genealogy archives, even Belridge's digitized newspaper records from the 1950s. Nothing came up under Elizabeth Harper. No obituaries, no memorials, no help us find her articles. Even the town's historical society site, which listed every known disappearance in Belridge's history, had no mention of her. It was like the girl had never existed. Out of frustration, I searched Sergeant Wayne Hollowell. There, I finally got a hit. He died in 1971, heart attack. His obituary was archived in a newspaper from a nearby town, and in it there was a single mention of a botched case involving a missing child in 1954 that plagued him for the remainder of his career. No names were mentioned, but the date lined up. I found something else. 2. A Belridge Gazette headline from June 8, 1954, 4 months before Elizabeth's disappearance. Local teen vanishes during county fair. No leads. 6. Marion Gleaves disappeared last night around dusk near the county fairgrounds. Last seen near the tree line by the west edge of the property. I searched Marion Gleaves. No updates, no suspects, no recovery. Just like Elizabeth gone. I printed both reports, laid them side by side, and noticed something that made my stomach drop. Both girls disappeared near wooded areas. Both were last seen near a tree line. Both were reported as being alone moments before vanishing, and both had no trace of physical evidence left behind, except the spiral carved into a tree. It was like the forest swallowed them. I remembered something my grandmother used to say when I was little. One of those offhand warnings old people say when you're being loud or annoying. Don't go into the woods near dusk, sweetheart. That's when the tall ones walk. At the time, I thought it was just a creepy bedtime threat to keep me inside. Now, it made my skin crawl. I called my mum that afternoon. I didn't mention the police report right away, just asked if she remembered. Any family stories about a missing girl in the 50s? Or maybe someone named Elizabeth Harper. She paused for a long time, then said, "No, I don't think so. Maybe you're thinking of a friend of Grandma's, someone from her church." I pressed her a little harder, told her about the report, the spiral symbols, the trail, the name dot. She grew agitated. "No, we don't talk about that stuff." Grandma was a strange woman toward the end. She believed in a lot of things that weren't real. "But the police report is real," I said. "The symbols are real. The dates match up." Then my mum said something that chilled me. "Just be careful digging into that kind of thing, okay? People around Belridge have long memories. Some of them don't like the past being dug up." And then she hung up. I went outside and walked to the edge of the woods behind my grandmother's house. The same woods that bordered St. Mary's Hollow, if I remembered the maps right. I stood there in the cool autumn light, staring into the trees, and on the bark of the first pine I passed, faint and weathered, but unmistakable, was a spiral, roughly carved, maybe decades old. I didn't sleep again that night either, because now I didn't just believe the case had been buried. I believed someone had made sure of it, and I wasn't sure if I'd just stumbled onto a long-forgotten cold case, or a doorway to something much, much older. It was around 2 a.m. when I pulled down the attic stairs again. The house was still, the kind of quiet where the ticking of a clock sounds like footsteps in the walls. I should have gone to sleep. I had been up for almost 40 hours straight, running on gas station coffee and adrenaline. But I couldn't stop. I felt like I was chasing something that had been waiting for decades to be found, and it had chosen now to rise from the attic shadows. I climbed the stairs slowly this time, holding a flashlight in one hand and a notepad in the other. I wasn't just looking for more police records now. I was looking for any piece of my grandmother's life that could explain why she had hidden a missing persons file, and why no one else in the family seemed to know the name Elizabeth Harper, or worse, maybe they did, and just chose not to say anything. The attic was colder than it had been before, almost like the temperature dropped as soon as I stepped inside. I could see my breath curl in the flashlight beam. I ignored it. I searched for hours, going through every dusty box, every warped drawer and rat-nibbled suitcase. That's when I found the cedar chest. It was tucked behind an old dresser, under a moth-eaten wool blanket. No lock this time, just a rusted latch. When I opened it, I saw stacks of old letters wrapped in silk ribbon. Dozens of them, postmarked between 1949 and 1955. I scanned the envelopes. Many were from a woman named Marjorie Harper. That name again, Elizabeth's mother. My heart was pounding. I opened one of the letters at random and started to read, "Dear June, I don't know who else to talk to. The police are giving up. The church won't even mention her name. It's like everyone is pretending she was never real. I can't sleep. I can't breathe. I still hear her voice sometimes from the woods. You believe me, don't you? You saw it too." The spiral, June. My grandmother's name was June Taylor. My hands started to shake. I opened another letter. I'd been dreaming about that night, about the tall girl. Her dress was wet like she'd come up from the river. She didn't blink, just held Lizzie's hand and walked into the trees like they were hers, like she lived in them. I know what I saw, June. I know it sounds mad, but you saw her too. Don't pretend you didn't. Please, write back. Another. I found another spiral today behind the church. Smaller, carved into the bell post. My husband says I'm seeing things, but I'm not. There's a pattern, there's something calling. To us, something old. Please, June, help me remember. I sat back against the wall, heart racing. My grandmother wasn't just a witness. She was involved. Somehow, she had been part of it. Maybe not in the disappearance itself, but she knew. She had seen something, and for decades, she had hidden it. Why? Because she was afraid, because she wanted to forget, or because she had helped bury the truth. I flipped through the stack of letters, trying to build a timeline. The earliest ones sounded frantic, like two women who had shared something unspeakable, trying to convince each other it had happened. But over time, Marjorie's letters became shorter, colder, angrier. Then they stopped entirely. The last one was dated December 22nd, 1954, 2 months after Elizabeth vanished. Fine, keep your silence. I hope it keeps you warm at night. I know what I saw, and I hope to God it never comes for you next. No signature, no return address, just that single paragraph. I kept digging through the chest and found more, not letters this time, but photographs. Dozens of them, black and white, curled at the edges. Most showed church gatherings, summer picnics, or local parades. But one photo in particular stopped me cold. It was a group shot of children at what looked like a Sunday school play. Around 20 kids, all standing in rows in front of the Bellridge Chapel. My grandmother stood in the back with 2 other adults, but in the second row, off to the side. A little girl with light-colored hair, a sun hat, and dark eyes that looked directly at the camera. Someone had circled her face with red pen and scrawled beneath it, in faded cursive, Elizabeth. I know it's her. I flipped the photo over. Something had been written on the back, 3rd from left, but not in the others. Compare group shots. She only appears in this one. I found 3 more photos from the same day, from slightly different angles, and the note was right in the other group photos. Same children, same outfits, same location. There was no trace of the blonde girl. The space where she had been standing in the circled photo was empty. No glitch, no blur, just gone, like she had never been there at all. I stayed in the attic until sunrise, my mind racing, because the facts were no longer adding up to something explainable. This wasn't just a forgotten case. This wasn't just a child who went missing and was poorly documented. This was deliberate erasure. A child who appeared in one photo, but not the others. A family who claimed they didn't remember her. A town that never listed her disappearance. And a woman, my grandmother, who had hidden every trace of it in the attic and never told a soul. The next day I dug into public records, births, deaths, school rosters. Elizabeth Harper didn't exist. There were no medical records, no birth certificate, no baptismal record from the church. Nothing. But Marjorie Harper did exist. I found her in census logs from 1950, a schoolteacher, widowed, lived on Appleview Road, no mention of children. But here's the part that made my skin crawl. In the 1950 census, she was listed as living with her daughter, Elizabeth. Age 2. In the 1960 census, she was listed as living alone. No explanation, no note of death, just gone. My grandmother kept her secrets well, but she forgot one thing. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it climbs out of the attic, dusts itself off, and knocks on your door with a cold, dead hand. And I was just starting to realize it hadn't knocked yet. but it was walking up the stairs. By the time I left the house that afternoon, the sky had turned grey and swollen with cloud. The kind of sky that makes the whole world feel like it's being held underwater. I had printed a copy of the map from the police report, the one that showed the last place Elizabeth Harper had been seen alive. St. Mary's Hollow Trailhead. It was only a 20-minute drive from my grandmother's house, tucked just beyond Belridge's old cemetery, where generations of lichen-streaked headstones leaned, like tired bones in the dirt. It wasn't on any modern GPS. I had to use the police map and match it up with satellite images, just to find the road. It didn't even have a name anymore, just a narrow dirt path that disappeared between two pine trees, like the entrance to a forgotten world. There was a wooden post at the start of the trail, rotten at the base and sagging. In the middle, once, it had probably held a sign. Now, it held a jagged plank with a single word carved into it, long since weathered to near illegibility, but I could just make it out if I leaned close enough. Sanctuary. I don't know why. That word unnerved me so much. Maybe because I couldn't tell if it was a promise or a warning. I followed the trail as it wound, deeper into the forest. Birds didn't sing. Wind didn't blow. Even my own footsteps felt muted, like the ground didn't want to remember I was there. The deeper I walked, the stranger the woods became. The trees leaned in unnaturally, their branches twisted like frozen fingers reaching toward each other overhead. The light grew dimmer, more grey. Even though it was only mid-afternoon, it felt like dusk. According to the map, I was getting close to the location marked last seen. It was a fork in the path, two narrow trails veering left and right. But when I reached it, I found something that made my skin prickle. There was no fork anymore, just one straight trail, but to the side. Behind a cluster of trees, there was a break in the underbrush, almost like a scar in the forest. A place where a trail used to be, and nailed to a tree beside it, so high I almost missed it, was a piece of wood, maybe a foot wide. Carved into it was a spiral, not a swirl, not graffiti, a spiral dot, just like the ones mentioned in the police report. I stepped off the trail and pushed through the brush. The deeper I went, the colder it got, unnaturally so, like the air had stopped circulating entirely. I checked my phone. No service. Battery draining fast. I looked around. Every direction looked the same. Trees too close together. No sound, no wind. And then I saw it. A clearing dot at the center was a stone. Well, moss-covered, maybe 5 feet across. Old, so old the stones were. Crumbling. Around it were 4 wooden crosses, half rotten and leaning at odd angles. I approached cautiously. The well had no rope or bucket, just a black hole in the middle, yawning up at the sky. When I stepped closer and peered in, I couldn't see the bottom, but I could hear something, faint, wet, like breathing. I stumbled back, heart pounding. My instinct screamed to run, but something kept me rooted. Curiosity, fear, the need to know. Then I noticed something carved into the edge of the stone. Lizzie's gone. We made it happen. God help us. The words were barely legible, scratched in like a confession, and beside them, the same spiral symbol, I. Took a few steps back and turned to leave. That's when I saw the shoe, half buried in the mud near one of the wooden crosses. Small, faded pink. The kind of shoe a little girl might wear in the 1950s. Knelt to pick it up, and that's when I heard a voice, faint, just a whisper, but unmistakable. She followed her. I spun around, no one there, just trees, just windless silence. I backed out of the clearing, nearly tripping on a root, and forced myself back through the brush to the main trail. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. Not until I reached my car and slammed the door shut, locking it even though there was nothing but trees around me. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped the keys twice before getting the engine started. As I pulled away from the trail, my headlights caught something between the trees. A figure, tall, thin. Thin, wearing a long dress, head tilted just slightly. But by the time I stopped the car and reversed, it was gone. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring into the woods, waiting for something, anything to move. But nothing did. Not a bird, not a branch, just stillness. When I got back to the house, I went straight to the bathroom and threw up. Not from sickness, from fear. The kind of fear that roots deep and grows teeth. Because here's the thing, I didn't imagine that voice. I didn't imagine the shoe, and I didn't imagine the writing on the well, which means one terrifying truth was becoming clearer by the minute. Elizabeth Harper didn't just disappear. She was taken, and something or someone in those woods has never let her go. When I woke up the next morning, the forest was still on my skin. I could feel it in the folds of my clothes, in the back of my throat, in the sound of silence that pressed against the window panes of my grandmother's house. It wasn't just that I'd found something out there. It was that something out there had seen me. I knew I couldn't go back, not yet. Not until I understood more, until I knew what I was looking at. So I sat down with the police file again, page by page, line by line, every misspelled name, every crossout, every paperclip indentation that hinted there had once been more. And that's when I found it. Tucked into the fold of a page near the back was a small, folded slip of paper, brittle, handwritten, and stained. I must have missed it before. There was no header. Just a date, October 15th, 1954, and a name, Henry Cutter. I froze. I remembered the name from the witness list. He was 10 at the time. The only child who mentioned seeing Elizabeth walk away with the tall girl. His account had been dismissed as unreliable. But this wasn't in the original report. It looked like a field note, maybe transcribed later, an unofficial interview. The handwriting was messy, rushed. But what it said chilled me to the bone. I told them she wasn't alone. She didn't look scared. She just followed the tall lady. She was humming something low, not a song I knew. I called to Lizzie, but she didn't answer. The lady turned around and smiled, but her mouth didn't move. It was like her face didn't match her smile. I stared at that last line for what felt like an hour. Her face didn't match her smile. What does that even mean? Who was Henry Cutter? And more importantly, was he still alive? I started digging. There was no internet record under that name in Belridge. No obituaries, no social media, no local profiles. But in a scanned school roster from 1954, there he was. Henry Cutter, grade 4, and beside his name, a note written in pen. Withdrawn, November 1954, relocated, Riverview, a psychiatric facility that I looked it up. Riverview had been shut down in 1981 for a list of reasons that read like something out of a horror movie. Patient neglect, unethical treatments, missing records. But during the 60s and 70s, it had quietly transitioned to long-term elder care before its final closure. I found a surviving administrative database, archived by a mental health history project, and in it, a miracle Henry L. Cutter. Born 1944, transferred from Riverview in 1978. Last known residence, Shady Glen Assisted Living, Morrisville, PA, still alive. The facility was just under 2 hours away. I didn't think. I just got in my car and drove. I didn't even tell anyone where I was going. Somehow, that felt dangerous. Like saying it out loud would alert something that didn't want this to be uncovered. The building was beige and boxy, the kind of nursing home that looked like it had never once been touched. By joy. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and microwaved soup. The front desk nurse was polite, but suspicious. "You said you're a journalist?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Freelance," I lied. "Just writing a retrospective on cold cases from this area." Henry's name came up. She scrolled. Through a screen. "He doesn't usually take visitors." I smiled politely. "Just 5 minutes." She led me down a quiet hallway, lined with peeling wallpaper and muted conversation behind doors. At the end was a small room, dimly lit, with a television showing static and a man sitting beside it in a threadbare armchair. He looked older than age itself, all white hair and sunken cheeks, and eyes that seemed to flicker with memory and disuse. "Mr. Cutter?" I asked gently. He turned his head slowly, blinked. "You know about the girl, don't you?" he said. My breath caught. I think I do," I said. "Elizabeth Harper," he nodded once. Not surprised, not confused, just tired. "She never screamed," he said softly. "That's what haunted me. They always scream. The others, but she didn't." I stepped closer, heart hammering. "You saw her disappear." He shook his head. "I saw her follow." "That's worse. Means she wanted to go. Means it was already inside her." I sat down. He leaned forward slowly, his bones creaking with effort. "You ever hear humming, son? Humming out in the woods. Late, low, and slow, like breath. In a throat." He looked at me. "Don't follow it." Henry told me everything. He remembered that day with a clarity that bordered on obsession. Said it was the last day he ever went near the forest. Said the tall lady had been watching them for weeks before, that glimpsed just at the edge of vision. Always behind trees, never moving. Said the adults couldn't see her. Said some of the kids could. "She wasn't new," he whispered. "She was old, old like bark and root, like bone that never stops growing." He paused, shivering, even though the room was warm. "She didn't take Lizzie. Lizzie walked into her shadow like she belonged there." I asked him why no one believed him. He chuckled, dry, broken. "They did believe me. That's why they locked me up." He looked toward the window. "They were afraid I'd tell someone who'd listen. That it would wake up again." "Wake up again," I echoed. He nodded, slowly. "They bury it. That's the whole town. Always has been. You find the spiral, you're too close, and they bury it." He reached out suddenly and grabbed my wrist. His hand was cold and dry as paper. "If you found this story again, it means it's hungry." I didn't know what to say. He let go, his eyes clouded over, like the moment had passed, like something had gone to sleep again behind his pupils. He looked at the static on the TV. "Humming," he muttered, low and slow. When I got back, in my car, I sat there for a long time, listening, not for voices, not for screams, but for something worse, for humming, And in the silence of that parking lot, I swear I heard it. I drove back to Belridge in a fog, not from whether the skies were clear. Sun low on the horizon, trees golden with dying leaves, but from the weight of what I'd just heard. It felt like my reality had been tilted slightly to one side, and I was sliding toward some invisible edge. The road felt longer than before, the turns more narrow, the shadows more eager. Every time I looked in the rearview mirror, I expected to see her, that tall woman, the one from Henry's story, the one from the woods, the one I'd almost seen. When I got back to my grandmother's house, the sun had nearly set. I parked in the gravel, grabbed my backpack and the documents I'd brought back, and stepped onto the porch. That's when I noticed it. A small pile of rocks by the doormat, arranged in a spiral. I froze. It hadn't been there before. Not when I'd left. Not when I'd arrived days ago. Not ever. 6 rocks, curved clockwise, perfectly placed. I bent down and carefully swept the spiral apart, trying to ignore the growing cold under my skin. It felt like something had slipped past me in the dark, like I'd left a door open and it had stepped inside. I told myself it was a coincidence, a prank, maybe a squirrel or a neighborhood kid. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't a message from someone, it was a message from something. Inside, the house was still. Too still, the kind of stillness that suggests waiting. I checked the attic first, even though I didn't want to. The cedar chest was still there, still full of letters and photos, and brittle memories that no longer felt like mine to touch. But something was different. I couldn't say what at first, and then I saw it on the wooden beam above the chest. Scrawled faintly in chalk, or maybe dust, was a spiral. It hadn't been there before, and worse, there were more. 1 on the back of the attic door, 1 on the mirror in the upstairs hallway, only visible when the light hit just right, 1 on the inside of the window above the kitchen sink. They were everywhere, faint, hidden, watching. I barely slept that night. Every sound made me sit upright. At 2:37 a.m., I woke up to the unmistakable creak of a door opening somewhere in the house. I held my breath and listened. Floorboards groaned downstairs. Not loudly, just enough to let me know I wasn't alone. I crept downstairs with a flashlight in one hand and a fire poker in the other. Room by room, I checked the house. Nothing was out of place. No open doors, no broken windows. But when I reached the hallway mirror, my breath caught. The spiral that had been faint before was now clearer, darker, fresh, and just beneath it, words fogged into the glass like breath from unseen lungs. She never left. I wiped the mirror clean with a towel and stepped back. Every part of me wanted to run, to pack a bag and leave this place and never look back. But this wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about truth. My grandmother had hidden something. Henry, Cutter, had warned me it was waking up, and now it was no longer staying in the woods. Now it was in the house. The next morning, I called my mum again. This time, I didn't soften it. I told her about the police file, about the trail, about the well and the crosses, and the humming and the spirals. I told her about the cedar chest, about Marjorie, Harper's letters, about the photo of Elizabeth that showed her in one frame, and gone in the next. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, finally, "Your grandmother had dreams when she was young," my mum said. She used to sleepwalk, talk in her sleep, say strange names. What kind of names? She said there was a woman who watched her from the woods. She called her the tall one with the wet dress. She said the woman knew her name, said she hummed. My stomach dropped. She stopped talking about it eventually. My mum continued, but she changed. She burned some of her old journals. She stopped going near the forest. And she never let me walk near St. Mary's Hollow. Why? Didn't you tell me this before? Because I thought she was sick. I thought it was dementia. Or maybe something she made up as a child to cope with. I don't know. Something. But it wasn't made up, I whispered. I know. She hung up a few minutes later, her voice trembling, and I realized something else. This wasn't just a mystery buried in the past. It was a warning passed down in silence. A generational secret, not folklore, not rumor, but a containment. And someone, maybe even my grandmother, had known that all it took to break it was remembering. That night, as I was locking up, I saw it again. On the porch railing, carved this time, not just marked that the spiral, but not alone. This time, there were words beneath it, for words shallow and jagged, like they'd been scratched with a nail. You followed her too. I started recording everything. Audio notes, video logs, voice memos on my phone. Not because I thought anyone would believe me. I was far past that point. But because I was beginning to lose track of what was real. I'd wake up in the middle of the night with dirt under my fingernails and pine needles in my sheets. I'd find my shoes damp by the back door when I knew I hadn't stepped outside. And the worst part, I had started to hear it, to dot the humming dot at first. It was faint, so soft, I thought it was just tinnitus. Or maybe an old pipe vibrating in the walls. But then it started to follow a pattern. Always the same low, droning note, always late at night dot, and always coming from outside. One night, I stood at the back window at 2:13 a.m., holding my phone in both hands, trying to record it. I could hear it just beyond the tree line, rising and falling like breath, like something breathing out a lullaby meant only for me. But every time I played back the audio, it was gone. No sound, just static. I thought I was going mad. Sleep-deprived. Paranoid, obsessed. I started setting traps for myself, taping my bedroom door shut at night, leaving flour across the hallway floor, locking the windows, and placing keys under glasses of water. But every morning, something had changed. The tape was peeled up. The flour was smeared once with footprints too small to be mine. And once, the water glass had shattered with the key still inside it. That morning, I found a fresh spiral carved into my pillowcase, dead. Center, too perfect to be accidental. I didn't scream, I just sat down and stared at it, while that low humming tone filled my ears again, louder this time, almost like it was inside my head. I didn't remember hearing it. I just remembered knowing it was there. That's when I went back to the attic. One last time, I wasn't looking for documents anymore. I wasn't even sure what I hoped to find, but I brought a crowbar and a flashlight and started peeling back floorboards. I know what made me do it. Something in me, a pull, knew the answers were deeper, beneath, buried, just like everything else in this town, under the boards. I found a narrow gap filled with dust and rat droppings, but wedged between two beams was a small, cloth-wrapped bundle, tied tight with fraying twine. I pulled it out. Inside was a child's toy, a wooden doll with painted black eyes and a red dress stuck next to it, a faded ribbon, and a page torn from a journal, covered in my grandmother's handwriting, shaky, panicked, the last entry. She came for me in the trees when I was 9. I followed the humming. I don't remember walking, only waking up near the old well with mud on my hands and her voice in my head. She wanted Lizzie. I told her where to find her. I thought that would make it stop, but it didn't. She just smiled. She smiled and said she'd be back when the forest forgets her name again. I think it's happening now. I think she's waking up again. I hear her in the walls. I hear her in the pipes. I hear her under my bed. God help me, I let her in. I sat on the attic floor, the doll in my lap, the humming growing louder with every second, until it wasn't in the distance anymore. It was under me, inside. Me everywhere, like something forgotten had remembered me. I ran outside into the cold night, half naked and barefoot, and stared at the woods. And there she was, at the tree line, tall, thin dot. So still, she didn't seem to be breathing, wearing that same soaked, dark dress, her eyes black and gleaming, and she was smiling, but her face didn't move, just like Henry said, the kind of smile that lived beneath the skin. I don't remember going back inside, but I woke up the next morning in my bed, fully dressed, with pine sap on my fingers and my feet caked in dirt. The humming was gone, but on the ceiling above my bed, written in dripping black ash, was a message. She remembers you. I tried calling my mom again. No answer. I tried texting 3 different friends, asking if I could crash for a few days. Nothing sent. I tried checking social media, the news, the weather. My phone wouldn't load anything. No signal, not even WI-FE. Like everything beyond Belridge had gone dark. Like I had stepped too far into something ancient and it had sealed the door behind me. I haven't left the house in 3 days. Not because I'm afraid of the forest, but because I'm afraid it's already here. The spirals are back in the frost on the windows, in the pattern of mold beneath the sink, in the way my breath fogs the glass when I get too close to the mirror. The humming never truly stops now. It's always there, just quiet enough to question, just loud enough to feel. Henry said she was waiting for someone to remember. That's how she wakes up, through stories, through names, through voices speaking the forgotten into light. And I think I've done exactly what she wanted. I followed the humming. I followed her smile. I followed the spiral trail right to the truth. And now she's following me. The library was the last place I expected to find horror. It smelled like old paper and cleaning fluid, and the fluorescent lights flickered just enough to make me feel like I was being watched. But it was the only place in Belridge that still had physical archives, microfilm, town logs, obituaries that hadn't been digitized. That's where I went next. I needed to know if what was happening had happened before. If this thing, this woman, this presence in the woods, was part of something older than just Elizabeth Harper's disappearance. Because the more I uncovered, the more it felt like I was standing at the edge of a much deeper pit. And it was. Staring back at me, the woman at the reference desk was kind, but distant. When I told her I was researching historical disappearances, her smile faltered just a little. Not enough for most people to notice, but I did. Because that's the thing about Belridge. It's not that people are ignorant. It's that they've trained themselves not to look too closely. That's the real magic here, not the rituals, not the spirals, the silence, the forgetting. I was directed to the basement archives. No one else was down there. Just rows of dust-covered filing cabinets and stacks of poorly labeled boxes. The air was musty and dry. The kind of place where time, congeals. It took me hours of digging, but I finally found what I didn't even know I was looking for. A box labeled simply Anomalies. It was misfiled under Z. Inside were newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, torn church bulletins, all spanning over a century, and all describing the same thing, over and over and over again. Children disappearing, spirals, drawn in ash, carved into pews, etched into windows. A woman in the woods, always tall, always wet, always smiling. The earliest clipping was from 1891. 4 children gone missing from Belridge during summer harvest. Witnesses report strange singing from the northern wood. Then, each disappearance spaced out by just enough years that people forgot, that the trauma softened, that the town could reset, and each time there was a note, sometimes scribbled on the back of the article, sometimes filed alongside the clippings. 3 words, always the same: we remembered her. By the time I got to the documents from the 1950s, I wasn't breathing. There were letters from a pastor named Father Leland, dated shortly after Elizabeth vanished. One was addressed to a man I didn't recognize, a brother, Carson, and it sent chills down my spine. We've tried to contain it again. The spiral has been sealed in the chapel wall. The bell will not ring until the cycle ends. We have burned the names, we have blinded the stones, but I fear it is not enough. It never is. Another, even more chilling: the children see her first. They always do. She sings to them, and they forget what they fear. That is how she enters, through joy, not dread, through the soft door of dreams. I kept reading until the words blurred on the page, because the truth was becoming horrifyingly clear. The town knew, not just about Elizabeth Harper, but about all of it: the spirals, the woman, the cycle. I found a final envelope at the bottom of the box, yellowed, unsealed. Inside was a small square of cloth, part of a church sash, and a note, written in elegant cursive: to remember is to summon. To speak her name is to open the path. Forgetting is mercy. Memory is blood. There was no signature, just a spiral drawn in ink. When I emerged from the basement hours later, the sun had vanished. The librarian was gone. The building empty as I stepped into the cold evening air. Something about the town felt different. Too still, too quiet. No cars, no wind, no movement in the windows. It was like Belridge itself was holding its breath. I drove home fast, but when I pulled into the driveway, I stopped cold, because someone had written something on the hood of my car, not in paint, not in marker dot in mud, with a child's hand. Don't remember her. And beneath it, a spiral. I stepped inside the house and locked every door, every window, turned on every light. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter, because I had remembered her. I had spoken her name. I had opened the path. This town didn't just forget Elizabeth Harper. It had sacrificed her, and now the forgetting was fraying at the edges. Now her humming was rising again, not from the woods, from the walls. The next morning, I drove straight to St. Leland's Chapel, or what was left of it. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, didn't pack a bag, didn't leave a note. Something told me that even saying it out loud would change things. Like the name itself was a trigger, a match to gasoline-soaked silence. The church had been closed for decades, tucked away on the edge of town behind a rusted iron gate and a collapsing brick wall. No signs, no driveway, just a crooked wooden door half swallowed by vines, and a sagging bell tower that looked one breath away from collapsing, according to town. Records St. Leland's had been condemned in 1976 after a fire damaged the apse. No cause had ever been determined, no restoration ever attempted. But that didn't explain what was in the police archives. The note from Father Leland: the spiral has been sealed in the chapel wall. And then the even more ominous line: the bell will not ring until the cycle ends. I climbed the gate, crunching dead ivy under my boots, and stepped into the courtyard. Something about the air was wrong. It was cold, yes, unnaturally so, but still thick, like the world here had stopped breathing. Birds didn't chirp. Trees didn't sway. Even the wind avoided this place. The church door groaned as I pushed it open. Inside was exactly what you'd expect from a place untouched for half a century. Broken pews, moss crawling up the stone, glass crunching beneath my feet. But there was something else, something that didn't belong. The smell, like wet stone and sweet rot, like something had been buried beneath the floorboards for far too long, and it wasn't resting. Swept the beam of my flashlight across the room. The altar was still intact, cracked, but standing. And behind it the crucifix hung crooked on the wall, but untouched by flame. On either side of the nave, statues of saints had been knocked over, their faces cracked open like old fruit. One still stood upright near the apse, Saint Cecilia, I think, but her eyes had been gouged out, deliberately carved clean with something sharp. Her stone mouth was open, like she was mid-song, or scream. I circled the sanctuary slowly, watching the floor for signs of damage. Anything that might reveal the spiral the priest had mentioned. And then I saw it. Not on the floor, but the wall. Behind the altar, a massive circular indentation, maybe 8 feet wide, filled in with bricks of a different color, older and cracked, blackened by time and smoke. In the very center was something faint, carved into the mortar, a spiral, just like the others, but massive, crude, and sealed. I approached slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. There were names scratched into the bricks, a dozen of them. Some I recognized: Elizabeth, Harper, Marjorie Harper, Henry, Cutter, and others, IDIDN, single quotes. Next to each name, a date, and next to each date, a symbol, a vertical line, except Elizabeth's. Hers had no mark, just the name and a single phrase beneath it. She followed her. I reached out to touch the wall, half expecting it to be warm. It wasn't. It was vibrating, almost imperceptibly, like something on the other side was breathing. And then I heard it, faint, above me. From the bell tower, a low, metallic clunk. I stared upward. No birds, no wind, no ropes. But again, clunk, like the bell had shifted in its cage. And then I noticed the dust, pouring softly from the ceiling beams in a thin stream. It wasn't the bell, it was the tower. Something was moving up there. I backed away from the altar, every instinct screaming to leave, to run, to never come back. But then I saw the final thing that made my blood turn cold. On the back of a pew near the exit, freshly carved into the wood, still flaking at the edges. Don't let her ring it. No name, no explanation, just those 6 words. I left the church in silence. Didn't run, didn't breathe. I walked back across the courtyard like a man in a trance. Like running would somehow wake it up faster, and as I reached the edge of the gate, I turned back and looked up at the tower one last time, and I swear, in the belfry's shadows, I saw something move, long, thin, wet, watching me that night. I couldn't sleep. The humming had returned, louder than ever. This time, I wasn't the only one who heard it. I got a voicemail from my mum just before midnight. No words, just the sound of humming and the distant ringing of a bell. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with the police report, the clippings, my grandmother's journal pages, and the letter from Father Leland all spread out around me in a semicircle, a paper. Autopsy of the forgotten Dot. And at the center of it all was a new question. Why hadn't Elizabeth's name been marked off? All the others had a vertical line next to them, a crude slash like a tally dot, as if they'd been accounted for, as if someone had kept track of who the spiral had taken, but not Elizabeth. Her name was untouched, not forgotten, not crossed out, just waiting, waiting like she was unfinished, like she was still in play. I tried calling my mum again, no answer. I left a voicemail, something short, something desperate. Don't listen to the humming. Don't open the door after dark. Don't answer if someone knocks and doesn't say your name. I don't know why I said that. It just came out. A reflex, like I wasn't speaking to her, but channeling something that had been whispered to me in my sleep, because the dreams had started again. Or maybe they'd never stopped in the dreams. I'm back in my grandmother's attic, but it's different. Larger, stretching endlessly, filled with spirals painted in tar across the floorboards and walls. There's a lullaby humming beneath the floor, and it grows louder every time I step closer to the old cedar chest. But in the dream, the chest is breathing, swelling and deflating like lungs. And when I touch it, hands burst from inside. Small muddy hands, children's hands, that claw at the lid as something hums louder and louder until it drowns out the sound of my own screaming. I woke up with blood on my pillow. Nosebleed, at least. I hoped that's what it was, because it smelled off. Metallic, yes, but also earthy, like pond water and rust. Like something had crawled up through my sinuses from the other side of the spiral. That morning, I made a decision. I had to go back to St. Leland's, not the chapel, the registry. All churches kept one, or used to. A logbook of baptisms, weddings, deaths, names etched into permanence by candlelight and intention. I didn't know what I expected to find, only that the priest's note haunted me. We have burned the names. We have blinded the stones, but it is not enough. If they had tried to erase her, maybe they'd also recorded those they feared she would touch. And if that list still existed, I had to know if I was on it. The Belridge Historical Society was closed, but the side window was unlocked. It wasn't breaking and entering if the building had been abandoned for a decade. Right. The air inside was stale with time. Dust motes floated like ash in the amber light. Most of the records had been moved to a digital archive years ago, but in the basement there were still file cabinets with paper logs, boxes stacked floor to ceiling, some labeled in pencil, others with stickers so old they'd curled into oblivion. And behind one heavy oak cabinet, I found what I'd hoped and feared I might, a thin, crumbling leather book labeled St. Leland's Parish, Registry 1850-1980. I opened it gently. The first pages were brittle but legible. Dates, names, sacraments. Columns for birth, baptism, communion, death. I flipped forward. Elizabeth Harper. There she was, but no death date. Next to her name was a black spiral drawn in ink. No words, just that mark, like a stamp, a brand, and 2 pages later, the same spiral beside. Another name, then another dot. No order, no pattern, just an unspoken list. A trail of victims disguised as parishioners. I turned the pages faster now, my fingers trembling. The spiral returned every few pages, always beside a child's name. No dates of death, no explanations, just the symbol. And then I found it buried in the very back, a torn page, newer than the rest, slipped between 2 older ones. Someone had added it after the book had already been shelved. There were only 6 names listed, all written in the same hand, same ink, same color. But it wasn't from the 50s. It was modern at the top of the page. Candidates for marking, beneath that, Harper, Marjorie, Cutter, Henry Lawrence, Peter, Harlan, Miriam, Whitaker, Thomas, my name. My heart dropped. There it was. My name, written in the book of a church that had closed, decades before I was born. A church I'd never stepped foot in until days ago. A list made by someone long dead, or worse, not dead at all. And next to every name, except mine, marked only mine, was still blank, waiting like Elizabeth, like I was part of some unfinished story. And suddenly all the pieces clicked. The spirals, the missing children, the cycles. This wasn't just about Elizabeth Harper. It never was. She was a keystone, a crack in the dam. Something had fed on her memory, and others like her for generations. Each time the town forgot. Each time they buried it, sealed it in a wall, burned the names, scratched symbols into pews. But every few decades, someone remembered. Somehow, someone always opened the spiral again, and now, that person was me. I stood in the darkness of the archive, registry in hand, suddenly aware of how cold it had gotten. I could see my breath, and then the humming started, low, close, not distant anymore. Behind me, I turned slowly. There was no one there, but on the floor, where my footprints should have been, were 6 muddy footprints instead, small, child-sized, walking in a perfect spiral, leading right to my feet. That night I lay awake, heart hammering, every nerve on edge. The registry had changed everything. I wasn't just a bystander anymore. I was on the list. As the hours stretched on, the house felt heavier, like something was settling into the shadows, waiting, watching, calculating. And then it started. The knocking at first. I thought it was the wind, a soft, rhythmic tap against the front door. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6. 6 knocks, and then silence. Then 6 knocks again. A pattern, measured, deliberate, like a secret code. I wanted to ignore it, tell myself it was kids, or raccoons, or some old plumbing. But the knocks came every night, same time, same pattern, always 6, and sometimes, I swear, I heard a whisper, a low, breathy voice saying my name. I stopped answering the door, stopped looking through the peephole. I barricaded the windows, but that didn't stop the knocks from coming. And then came the scratches, at first just faint, fingernail marks on the wood of the front door, then deeper, longer, like someone was trying to get in. trying to break the seal. One night, I heard it again, knocking, but this time it was inside the house. From the attic, 6 sharp raps, pause, top 6 more. I froze, my skin prickled. The same lullaby humming I'd heard before was now coming from above. The breath of the spiral I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the attic stairs. The air was thick with dust and old cedar. The spiral on the beam above. The chest was glowing faintly, like a slow pulse, and the chest was open. The doll was gone. The attic door slammed, shut behind me. I spun around, alone. The knocking started again, not on wood, not on walls, on air, invisible fingers tapping at my skull. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The same pattern, over and over, until I thought my head would shatter. I screamed, and the sound echoed in the silence. A voice answered, soft, childlike, but filled with sorrow. "I'm here." I shone the flashlight around the attic, desperate to see the source. But there was nothing, just the spiral and the humming and the cold the next day. I called my mum. I told her everything. The knocking, the humming, the glowing. Spiral, her voice trembled. "You have to be careful. Don't open the door. Not for anyone." That night I heard a different sound. A knock dot at the back door. Soft, 6 times. I didn't answer, but the door handle turned slowly, and then the hinges creaked. The door swung open an inch. A shadow moved just beyond the threshold. A figure, tall, wet, silent, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I slammed the door, locked it, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I cried, because I realized the truth. She's not just in the woods. She's not just in the spirals. She's in my house, watching, waiting, and if I let her in, I might never leave. That night, after I slammed a door shut on the shadow at the back entrance, I sat on the floor, trembling, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my ribs. The house felt smaller, suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. Around me, I kept looking toward the door, half expecting it to start rattling again. But then, silence. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. At dawn, the world outside was still quiet. Too quiet, like the town itself was holding its breath. Late morning, I heard a soft, deliberate knock at the front door. Not the back door this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The exact pattern. I stared at the door, frozen. A voice whispered. In my mind, "Don't open." But when I peeked through the peephole, I saw a woman standing there. She was soaked from head to toe, her clothes dripping water onto the porch. Her hair clung to her face, framing eyes that seemed impossibly deep and dark. And I knew who she was. She didn't speak, she didn't move, just stood there, staring, that same twisted smile playing on her lips. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to blink, and when I opened my eyes again, she was gone. But the porch was wet, puddles reflecting a sky that had been dry all day. I called out to my mum again. Her voice was weak, distant, filled with fear. "If she comes inside, you're lost. She's not who you think. You have to protect yourself." I asked what she meant, but she just whispered, "Read the journal. Everything is in there." I grabbed the cedar chest and rifled through my grandmother's journals again. There, hidden between faded pages, was a passage I hadn't seen before. My grandmother wrote about a visitor she had met when she was a child, a woman who came from the woods, who whispered secrets and promised safety if only she would follow. But then the journal ended abruptly. With the words, "She told me I was the next." My hands shook as I closed the book. The visitor wasn't just a ghost or a memory. She was a warning, and I realized the chilling truth. The missing victim, my brother, confessed to murdering the one who kept showing up at my door, was not a victim at all, but a herald. Someone or something sent to remind me that the spiral was still open, and I was already caught in its web. That night, I didn't hear the knocking. Instead, I heard soft humming, just beyond the window, and the wet footprints leading to the porch. I knew it was time. The spirals, the names, the missing children, they all pointed to one thing. The spiral had to be closed. But how? The answer came to me in a dream. Not my dream, exactly. Something else's. I saw my grandmother, young and terrified, standing in the woods near the well. She was drawing the spiral in ash, whispering words I couldn't understand, her eyes wide with fear and determination. I woke up with a start, the dawn breaking through the blinds. The humming was louder now inside my head, like a song I couldn't forget. I gathered everything: the cedar chest, the journals, the doll, and the old police report. I had to find the well. The well was deeper than I expected. A dark hole in the forest floor, lined with ancient stones and tangled roots. I remembered the words from the priest's letter. The spiral must be sealed with blood and silence. My heart pounded. What did that mean? I traced the spiral pattern from the journals on the ground around the well, marking each point with ash from the fireplace. The air grew thick, cold. The humming became a roar. Then I saw her, the tall woman, wet, dress clinging to her frame, black eyes like voids. She smiled. I knew then the truth. The spiral was a cycle of remembering and forgetting, a pact made generations ago, a price to be paid, and I was the next in line to close the spiral. I had to sacrifice my own memory, to forget everything, to disappear into the dark. Just like the others, tears streaming down my face. I stepped into the well. Cold water engulfed me. The spiral of ash glowed faintly as I sank deeper. Her voice whispered in my ear, "You are remembered. Now you forget." I don't know how long I was there. Time lost meaning. When I emerged, the well was silent. The spirals faded. The humming stopped. Back at the house, everything felt different. The weight lifted, but so had parts of me. Names, faces, memories all slipping away like smoke. And I realized with a chill, the spiral was closed, but at a terrible cost. I woke up the next morning feeling lighter, physically and mentally. The oppressive weight that had hung over me for weeks was gone. The humming silenced. The spirals that had haunted walls and dreams had faded into faint memories. But the price was clear. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty pages of my journal. The words I had written over the last weeks seemed distant, like someone else's story. My memories of Elizabeth, Henry, my grandmother, all blurred, slipping through my fingers. I tried to recall the faces of those who had disappeared, but they felt like ghosts just beyond reach. The line between remembering and forgetting was thinner than I thought. I went outside. The forest looked peaceful, almost inviting. The sun filtered through the leaves like nothing had happened, but deep inside, I knew better. The spiral was closed, for now, but something in the air told me the cycle was only paused, that the town of Belridge still held secrets too dark to speak aloud. I called my mum. Her voice was clearer now. She asked if I felt better. I hesitated before saying yes, because part of me was gone, and the other part was terrified. At the end of the day, I went back to the attic. The cedar chest was still there, dust-free. Inside, the doll was gone, but on top of the chest was a small scrap of paper, a single spiral drawn in red ink, and a note. Until next time. I shivered. The spiral had closed, but it had not ended. The days after the spiral closed felt surreal. The silence was overwhelming. A quiet that wasn't peace, but absence. A space where memories had once lived, but now only shadows remained. I tried to live normally, go to work, talk to friends, pretend the spirals, the humming, the missing children were all part of a nightmare I'd finally woken from. But Belridge never lets you forget for long. The town is a place built on forgetting, generations of silence layered like paint over a cracked wall. Every few decades, the spiral opens. Someone remembers, someone pays the price, and the spiral closes again. The townsfolk act like nothing happened. But the signs are there. The spirals carved into ancient trees, the cracked windows of abandoned homes, the lullabies whispered through the wind at night. I don't know how long the spiral will stay closed this time, or who it will claim next, but I know this: the cycle will continue, because memory is a curse, because to forget is mercy, and because the spiral always waits. Sometimes I think I still hear the humming, just faintly, just enough to know it's never truly gone. That somewhere in the woods of Belridge, beneath the tangled branches and fallen leaves, something ancient is stirring, waiting for the next name, the next story, the next voice to remember. And when that happens, the spiral will open again.